Welcome to the Dream Big Farm. It's a rainy, drizzly day out today, so we figured we would do inside projects. And with farming, there's always a lot of clothing getting destroyed between getting caught on fences and just like welding, burning holes in them. And it does get expensive having to buy new clothing all the time, so we do try to fix the ones that don't have major problems. So like today, I'm working on a t-shirt. You can see down in this corner, it got caught on a fence and it ripped it open, and I'm going to be showing you how to put together, or how to sew together, the hole. So you're going to start by laying the hole out, and being it's a t-shirt and it doesn't fit super tight, it's best to put the seams on the inside. So I roll it so that I have the inside of the shirt, so you know the inside because here's the seam on the bottom of the shirt. So then you have it so all your seams will be fairly invisible. It'll be a little obvious that it had been sewn, but for the most part, you won't be able to tell real well. But next, you're going to need a needle and thread. So here's the needle. It's just a basic little needle. And then since I have a black shirt, I'm going to use black thread. So you find the end of your thread, nip off the little fuzzy part, and then thread it through the needle. Can you grab the scissors? I dropped it. And then, depending on how good you are threading through the needle, not all threads will go as well. So basically, you will have to just kind of aim for the little hole in the needle and poke through. Some people will like lick the end of the thread a little bit if it's too fuzzy and you can't get it to go through. But I got to go through on the first shot. So I'm going to do a double thread, so I'm pulling it straight. It might be a little hard to see the thread, because black is one of the harder colors to work with and see on camera. But I have it about that long, so between my hands. And then I will find my end, grab my scissors, and I will cut the thread. So then I bring my two tails together from the thread. So I have one tail here and one tail here, and then I will line them up, pinch the tails with my one hand, and then loop the thread around my other finger, and then you have it so you basically pull the little tail through the loop and then pull it tight, and you want your knot to be near the end of the thread. And you might have to do this at least twice, because otherwise it has more of a tendency to want to pull through the fabric, because I'm using t-shirts are jersey knit fabric, which makes them stretchy, but also makes it harder to hold the knots. So unwrap it from my pin cushion, set the pin cushion off to the side, make sure your thread's straight with the doubles, like with it when you do double threads, because if you have an extra weird loop in there, it will have more problems with creating knots. And then find where my hole went. So we found the hole. We find this is the inside, so you want to start on the inside. And it's much as you'd think you'd want to start on this point or this point, you don't want to. Being it's a kind of an L-shaped hole, you want to start in the middle point. Otherwise, when you get to the edge, it'll tend to be pulled over this way or this way. But if you start on the point that's ripped out and then go that way, and then we'll have to either stitch back this way or restart a new thread and come back this way. That's how you get the hole to line up nicely. So we'll start by poking into the fabric. And then I'm going to pull it back up. And then I'm going to poke into the tip area where it was ripped out here. You don't want to be right on the very, very edge of the fabric, because being it's a knitted fabric, it'll cause it to want to pull out. So you have a little bit of a lump when you're done. And then right before I pull it tight, something's catching. I'll set that out of the way so I don't catch on it. Right before you pull it tight, for being it's a knitted fabric, you go between your two, so you pull the two strings apart by the knot, and you take your needle and go through the two areas, so you can kind of see there, and then pull it so it comes tight. The reason I'm doing that is it makes it less likely for your knot to pull through. Otherwise, you'll get all the way done, and you throw it the first time through the wash, and it will just kind of unravel. So So doing that way allows it to be able to survive the wash multiple times. And then I just continue. So I have my hand here, you can kind of see the differences. The fabric has a bit of a roll to it, so you got to keep that in mind when you're sewing. You kind of poke into it and then poke into the other side of what you want to sew. And then you just kind of pull it tight. And then you just repeat over and over again. So try not to poke your finger because that hurts, and if you're using a light color fabric, you'll get blood on the fabric. And then you just keep going. So poke through one side of the fabric of the hole, poke through the other side of the fabric of the hole, and then just keep stitching. And I sew a lot of clothing that because you always get caught on something, well not always, but you tend to get caught on things, or something ends up ripping your fabric. So that way it just makes it so that you can have more life out of the shirt, because everywhere else in the shirt is in good shape yet. It's not wore thin. There's no burn holes from welding. There's no big stains in it. So it's a very good shirt yet. It just needed a little repair where it got caught. And this style hole is pretty easy to fix because it is like a clean tear. The ones that are a little bit harder to fix are burn holes. So if you're welding and you burn a hole, it doesn't have any super clean lines. So like this one had a nice clean shape. The other one will just kind of be a round melted spot a little bit into the fabric, especially if you have anything that has polyester, because that is a form of plastic. Cotton fabric takes the heat a little bit better, but for the most part it also is pretty much the same. So if you learn to do this, it works on any kind of garment. So you can do it on t-shirts, jeans. Some people even sew the toes of their socks. I don't really have a problem with that part, but anybody that has issues, you just got to keep in mind that if you have a tighter fitting clothing, you'll feel the seam. So you'll have this little hump here. I don't know if you can see it black on black, but we'll be doing blue fabric next. So then if it's really tight fitting, sometimes it'll rub on your skin and it'll be irritating. So in those events, sometimes I'll put the seam on the outside. And in jeans, sometimes that can look kind of cool. It gives it more of the, I don't want to say torn look, but for a while it was kind of a style having holes in your jeans. And then all the seams and extra patches would just add character to it. This one, being it's a t-shirt, and you'd probably be wearing it other places besides just at home sometimes, it makes it less obvious to see the seam if you put the little bit of a lump that it makes from the thread and the hem on, inside. It does take a little bit of time to do this, but if you like the clothing and you want to fix it, it's worth it.
So how long have you been sewing?
I learned to sew from my grandma when I was really little. The first thing I started learning to sew on was Barbie doll clothes, which she used to make lots of Barbie doll clothes and sell them at little antique, well, not really antique, but craft shows. So, and she made some really extravagant Barbie doll dresses and stuff like that. And if you can make Barbie doll clothes, any other clothes, like human-sized clothes, is so easy because the Barbie doll stuff is so small that when I remember times when I was little and she would make little jackets and stuff, and you'd be taking a pencil trying to poke the sleeve the right way out because you want to sew things on, like the small doll clothes, you want to sew the same as human clothes, so you have all the seams on the insides and stuff like that, which makes it kind of hard to turn them the right way out. But that's how I started learning how to sew, and I was probably about 7 years old. But hand stitching is good. It's fun projects for if you have kids and you want to teach them something easy. Basically, as soon as they're old enough to be able to use the scissors and know enough not to poke themselves in the hand, then it's a good time to start teaching. Because it's a good life skill for anybody. It doesn't have to be just the farmer, because everyday stuff happens, and then you have holes and things. Okay, so I got to the end. I started doing the knot already without telling you because I kind of automatically do it. But so basically to do a knot, people think you got to tie the ends and you fiddle with these little bitty strings. That's not really the easiest thing to do. But a sewer's knot is you come to the end, you poke back in where one of your stitches were. So you're basically going back like one stitch. Pull the thread through. This is a little long for that. But then you have this loop once you pull the thread through. You take the back of your needle and put it back through the loop. Reason you're going backwards is usually your thread's really short at this point, and then that's why you're going backwards rather than forwards with the needle. But then you just pull it down tight like you'd be doing a stitch, but it's crossing over the thread, and you want to do that twice and it will hold. So then I did that once, and then you're basically poking back in through the same stitch or the knot area where you've done it, that creates friction so the thread does not come pulled out. And then you stick your needle through the back of your loop. So I'll kind of open it up. So here's the loop from the sewing thread. And then I took my needle and pulled my needle through the loop and then just pull it tight. And that's how you make a knot. And then I will stick this in the pincushion for right now. And then I just take my scissors. I nip it. I don't want to nip it right at the knot. You want a tiny little tail. And then that's how you did that side. And being I cut and knotted that side, I have the other side of the hole to do yet. So I am going to retie and start over. So I have a lot of thread left on my needle. You grab the tail, you take your finger, loop it around your finger, grab it with the top of the thread with another finger, and then here's the tail, push it through the hole, and then grab the tail and pull it tight. So see how we have a loop and the thread's just through it? And we will pull it tight, and you'll do that about 3 times. So then it'll help so the knot doesn't pull through. And sometimes your knot doesn't always end up right on the tail of the thread, which is okay. And even other times you'll have it where your knots don't line up. You probably can't tell, but I have 2 knots and they're just a little bit apart. So my 3rd knot, if I can get it to line up right on them, it'll pull the 2 knots and they'll make it one nice big knot. And I have a long tail because here's my knot here and that's my tail. So I'll just take the end, nip it with scissors, and that's good. And then we have this. So I have my thread, find my hole, and then depending on which way you like to sew, I like to sew away from me. So I will start typically down on this end, but being I'm starting away from where I'm sewing into, I want to kind of keep tension on the fabric. So I want to kind of keep it pulled straight. It doesn't have to be like I'm yanking on it, but I want it so it's not going to be like puckered like that, and then you'll have problems with a big lump. But I'll start before my rip. So my rip comes to right here. I want to come on this side of it a little bit, and that'll cause it so it won't rip out any farther. Because if you start just at the rip itself, it will have problems of wanting to rip farther past where you sewed. So you do about 1 stitch past the hole. And that'll be what kind of holds it so it can't fray any farther this way. So I poked my needle through both sides. So I have one side here, one side there. It's not very far between the 2 points. And then you just pull. And right before your thread gets to the end, so your knot hits the fabric, you want to find, you take your needle, or before it gets too tight, you can pull it out any time, it's fine. And you want it to get it so your 2 pieces of thread are apart. I'm just going to take the needle and kind of weave it between the 2 threads, or stick it between them, which isn't working as well as I was hoping in this one. But see how there's the knot there, and the needle is between the 2 pieces of thread, because I can't just pull forward. And then just pull it tight, and then you have a nice knot that won't come undone, and it'll work well for you. And then you just, next to your first stitch, pick one side, or poke one side of the fabric, poke the other side of the fabric, and then just kind of gently pull it through. And sewing works on all kinds of things. You don't have to sew just clothing. At one time I used to sew forklift seats because I was a forklift driver. So I didn't like my seat not having any stuffing in it. So because it was always, this forklifts don't have any suspension. And if you don't have a pretty good fluffy seat to sit on, your back will be really sore. And that makes it so it's a long day if you're driving a forklift unloading trailers all day. So then that way I would just, because the spot where you jump on and off the forklift, it would rub a hole through it in time, especially the older forklifts. So I'd take a piece of denim and restuff it with cotton balls because I had a lot of them and they were cheap. And then I would have a good forklift again, and it takes a long time to wear through the patch. And then there's a lot of other cool things with sewing, like on seats and stuff like that. It's hard because you might not be able to have a spot where you're able to poke straight through the fabric. It might be on an edge, so you have to like hook and go through. They do sell hook needles, which looks kind of like a C. So it's like a normal needle. It's pointed on one end, has the eye of the needle you put your thread through, but it's kind of a horseshoe shape. And there's different like angles that you can get them in, and that's how you sew when you can't get into a spot, like you're in a corner or something like that. And they work great for different kinds of fabric or different angles of things. So you're not limited to the straight needle. There's all kinds of cool sewing devices. You have the handheld sewing machine and stuff like that. I don't have one of those, and particular things like this, it doesn't work real well. I usually, if I'm going to use a sewing machine, I just have a normal basic sewing machine. And you want, when you're stitching, I kind of lost track of what I was talking about. I got kind of on a tangent with the story. But you want to keep your stitches, we'll go back to the sewing part here. You want to keep your stitches even. So when you poke the fabric needle into the thread, you want it about the same distance from the last time you poked in. So you'll have, I have a stitch here, and a stitch here. If you can keep your stitches kind of even together, it'll make it look more professional. And even if you're not good at this, or you don't have a clue what you're doing, people go, wow, you have nice straight stitches. Which, you know, the little comments like that are nice. And the best thing when you're sewing, like especially patches, if you get no comments at all, that people didn't even notice that there was a hole or anything like that, that's about the best thing you can get as a sewer. That, especially if you're patching stuff, if you can make it so it's not noticeable, that is, you've achieved great levels. So we're almost done with this. I'm to my point, and I just need to get probably one more stitch in here, and then I will be ready to put the knot in. And when you're pulling this thread tight, one thing that's important is when it pulls tight, if your two threads are not even, it'll create loops up, and you don't want to nip those off with the scissors, because if you do that, then your thread is technically broken, not tied, and it'll unravel. But that's just my random tips. So we're at the point right now. So here's my last seam right here, and here's where I just finished. So you want to poke your needle in for the knot. You want to poke it in an old, like one of your last stitches, right in a tight spot. And poking in a tight spot will keep it from unraveling. And being I'm getting kind of loops in my thread, I have to kind of straighten it out. Otherwise my knot's not going to turn out nice. So I poke the needle through, and here's the tails what's left after you poke your needle through. So take your needle, poke it through, or just kind of thread it through the hole, and then I went through, and then you pull it tight. And do that twice, and your thread will hold. But when you're doing this kind of stuff, just make sure that you keep your hand or an open, because like even a embroidery ring works if you're not comfortable with having your hand underneath it to clamp it in. So that way you're not going to stitch the shirt closed, because you have to have an opening to get in the shirt. So you don't want to stitch one piece of fabric to the other so it's not wearable. So I did it again. I forgot to tell you. I'm sorry. So here I will unthread it. Okay, so I missed that one, but it's fine. Just keep your stitch tight to the other one. So I poked through for the knot, the second part of the knot. Pull the needle through, and then basically take the needle, put it through the loop, and then just pull tight. And if you've done that twice in one spot, and you want to stitch like right in the same spot, so that'll hold your thread from trying to pull out, and then that's done. So I just cut the thread a little shorter, stick my needle back in the pin cushion so I don't end up stepping on it later, and let's see how I did. So this is how the back side looks. I don't know if you can pick it up real well on black, but you can see there's a little bit of a hump from where the seam was, and it is now no hole, but it's in the shape of an L because it was torn. So we're going to flip it over, and this is what my other side looks like. So it's a little noticeable, but not too bad. My stitching, I could have did a little bit better. It's not super even on the stitching, and in time you get better with practice. I don't hand stitch a lot, just when I'm fixing stuff once in a while. Otherwise, most of the time I do use a sewing machine. But that is how you fix a shirt. you want me to do the jeans right away too?
Sure.
So that's the black fabric, and now we're going to do jeans. Jeans are blue, so it probably actually show up a little bit better because black just doesn't show up real well on the camera. So that's the shirt. And the jeans, I'm not exactly sure what he got caught on, but see,
Usually fences.
yeah, he likes to jump over the fences instead of going through the gate. But here's the jeans, and it didn't get sewn right away, so you can see it's starting to fray out right here, which tends to be a little bit harder stitching, but it still can be done.
Can you trim it?
I don't want to trim it right now because right now it's holding the hole in the right position, because if your hole gets too oblonged or too awkward shaped, it does make it considerably harder to stitch. What I'm going to do is, see how we have these little pieces that are fraying off? I'm just going to nip that one, and then I'll nip this one so I don't have any like loose pieces, but the ones that are like the strings on the jeans that are giving up, see how I have like right here? Those I'm going to keep. I'm not going to cut them out, and there's going to be a little trick we'll do at the end, because you can kind of weave the fabric or the thread together so I don't have to get as tight into the denim fabric, because otherwise, being it's a hole like this, it'll want to pull tight. And when you're doing jeans especially, and if it's around a knee or something like that where it bends, you want to be really careful to keep the fabric straight. If you get your seams or patches on crooked, it'll pull on your knee every time you step, which is going to be very unpleasant. You just don't want to do that. But we kind of get it so our hole is fairly clean edges, so it makes it easy to stitch. And being these are jeans, and they're right up by like where it's going to rub on his leg, kind of by his hip, I'm going to put the seam on the outside. So basically, we will start, I think I have enough thread left on my needle. So I'll take the end, and I will do my knot. I'll bring my pincushion over here so you can see a little better. So I have my thread. You can see here, the two tails are together because it's doubled up, which also gives your thread more strength. Because sometimes the holes get a lot of pulling on if it's in a spot that where it moves or stuff like that. So I do one knot, wrap it around my finger, hook my finger in the other side, and then pull the tail of the thread through the hole. Grab the tail, and then just kind of line it up where my other knot was, and pull. And that makes my second knot. I'm going to do one more. I like to do 3 knots because it tends to make it a little bigger knot and less likely to just pull off the thread. So your seam of whatever you're sewing will hold a lot better. And then this is the same as the last one, where it's kind of an L-shaped hole. So I'm going to do it in 2 parts. And it'll also show you, because the second part we're going to be doing some weaving with the thread, which sounds kind of crazy, but it's how you do the bigger holes, so you can make it without having to put a patch of fabric in there. So this one is almost to the point you might want to put in and lay a back piece of fabric while you're doing this, but right now I think it'll be okay. If he would have gave me the jeans to stitch right away, it wouldn't have been a problem, but these have been washed like 6 times since the hole has been put in, so we're fixing them today. But we're going to start out by the point here. So we have our L-shaped hole, and I'm going to start kind of in the middle of this side. So I'm going to poke through the solid part, more of the leg, and then I'll catch the kind of the flap of what ripped off. And you want to try to poke right near the corner. And this is the same. Most fabrics are all woven, so then it'll just, you want to be a little bit in from the edge. If you're right on the edge, it'll be more likely to pull out, and your thread won't hold. So we pulled our thread to, here's my knot right here, and I'm going to pull it towards the hole, and then I'm going to put my needle between the 2 pieces of thread, and then that catches it, and it pulls tight. And the goal is to make it so it doesn't overlap your fabric too much, because if you overlap, it'll make it more of a bump when you're sewing. To get it so it's a flatter piece right now, I'm going to aim for not like a big lump like I did with the t-shirt, because one, it's a more rigid fabric, so it makes it easier to sew. But the other part is that it's basically, you don't want the bumps. It's just less comfortable to wear, and it looks nicer when you're done to have a more of a flatter seam. So how you do that is you don't pull your fabric or your thread quite as tight. Like, I'm not going to pull it till it puckers up. I'm just going to poke down. I'm going to have it tight so it's not like loose, or see right now it's loose so you can see my finger between the two pieces of fabric. We're not going to finish that way, but the first one's kind of hard not to. So I have it that way, and then I'm keeping my fabric kind of straight. So I have my hand behind there. If you're worried about poking your finger, there are lots of options of thimbles. In this case, a leather thimble works out pretty good, which I do have, but I don't use very often. I'll show it to you at the end here. So it's a nice, because you can, the leather thimble, you still can feel the fabric and stuff like that, but you can't poke yourself in the finger as easy. But back to what we're doing. I'll explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it. You poke into the fabric on one side of the cut, and you poke it out the other side. And you want to try to keep your stitches close together, so that way it doesn't have any likeliness of, if he gets near another fence or anything else that would catch, it'll just kind of slide over it instead of rip the hole bigger. That's the whole point of sewing, is you pulling the fabric back together so it doesn't catch on other items, like fences and anything else you get near. So you poke the needle through one side, you poke it out the other side, and we're not pulling it so it puckers up. We're just pulling it so it's a little tight, and then that'll be nice looking. And you just continue. And then I'm near the end of where the tear is, and we'll go one stitch farther than where the tear is, so it'll keep it from pulling and ripping down any farther. And being I have quite a bit of thread left, and I'm not going to tie a knot because I'm going to go up this way, I'm just going to stitch back up the other direction. So we'll stitch back in the place where we came from. One, the more thread will make it a little bit stronger. And two, it'll help cover up, see how we get this little fuzzies here from the edges of the jeans? Going back the other direction with the thread will actually keep it tighter with the thread, so you won't have all the fuzzies from the jeans, especially if you wash it a lot. And I'll just kind of pull them down, and you'll have a nice, being my thread's black, a nice black seam going up it. And it does take time, but I find sewing to be relaxing. So it's quite nice when you just kind of sit here in a nice rainy day. Well, we need the rain, so it's a nice rainy day, and it's just kind of stitch up the clothing. Because usually if I get a lot of stuff, I'll have like a pile of it, and when I get to it with a rainy day or I'm not doing field work, then we'll just start doing something easy. So it's an easy project. It's fun to teach young kids. You can find little sewing kits and stuff like that to do little keychains and stuff like that. So it gets kids used to sewing, because it's good to learn at a young age, because you do get better with practice as you go. And it's one of those life skills that doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, child, it's good to know how to sew, because everybody pretty much wears clothing. And in time, you'll either wear through something or catch on something sometime in your life. If you don't do anything with like round other things, then you probably won't have to worry about this. But for most times, or you'll have a seam of like store-bought clothing that will come out, and this will be a way to fix it too. And then I'm going to do a couple stitches here extra. I don't need to, but I'm just going to do it so I get my thread a little bit shorter. So that way you can see why I go through backwards with the needle when I make the knot. Okay, so my thread's getting really short. I'm using this as my last stitch, and I have this really tiny loop. So it's kind of, it pulls the loop so small when you try to use the tip of the needle. So I use the back part of the needle where the thread is and just kind of push it through backwards, and as long as you have enough thread on there to clear the tip of your needle, you can still make a knot. And you pull tight. And in the event that, so then that was tied down one, and we'll do that again. So either stitch through this way, or you can just pick one side of the thread and just poke it in. In the event that you went too far and you can't tie it, now what do you do? You'll poke it back through backwards. So then you would cut your thread. So you would have it here. I'll do two things. I'm doing too many things at one time. We'll finish tying the knot. So I'll go through 2 or 3 times when I'm doing the knot. So it's really short. Poke through the loop of the thread, and then I'll pull it back this way. And see, that's why my last knot, it got too short. But being I went backwards, I can just cut the thread and went like that. So back to what I was talking about. So basically, if you're sewing and you got carried away, you're having a good time sewing and you went too far and you don't have enough room to tie your knot, now what do you do? Well, you cut your thread because you can't go any farther anyway, and you're going to start with the needle again. So you'll rethread your needle and you'll put it back in and you'll go about 2 stitches back from where you were, and you're going to stitch at least twice on top of both of those 2 stitches. So you'll go through and around twice over both stitches where you were, and then you'll tie your knot off. The reason you're doing that instead of just like ripping out all the thread you just did is the main part of the knot is just to hold it so the fabric doesn't come open. So that way it will hold it tight and the rest of your stitching should not come out, as long as you made the thread tight. So your stitch tight, I mean you want to stitch on top of the same thread, so then that way your like last little bit you did to tie your knot will work. I don't fully recommend that, but it is an option. So we're going to rethread the needle because I ran out of thread and I still have this part, but this part's going to be a little bit different because we're going to stitch it, but we're going to stitch really loose, and then we're going to weave the needle through because see, I still have a hole. It's pretty big. I can stick my finger through and there's no, like, I can't pull that together without making it super uncomfortable to wear. So we will thread the needle and I will show you how to weave the thread with a needle to make it hold. And when I cut this, my scissors is kind of dull, so it leaves a little fuzzy on the end, so you just got to try to cut it again until it'll actually work. And then when I mean people lick the string, it'll take the tip of the string and just put it in your mouth to get a little wet with your tongue, and it will keep the fuzzies so they're not going every different direction, so you can stick it through the eye of the needle. Sometimes I can get it right away, sometimes I can't. This one has a pretty big eye in the needle, so it went through pretty easy. And then I'll get my thread. I usually go for about 1.5 to 2 feet when it's folded over. Try to hang onto your needle so it doesn't take off on you. If you get much farther than this, you're going to have problems with knotting. So between this hand and this hand, it's almost 2 feet. And I'll cut the tail. Set my thread out of the way so I don't get it all tangled and everything. And then we'll go back to tying. So you have your 2 tails, and the reason we do the 2 is it keeps the thread, makes the thread stronger, and it makes it easier to knot. So you have, like when you start it, you'll just poke your needle between the 2 threads and it'll hold your knot in your fabric, when I say easier to knot. And then you'll take it around, hang onto the tail of the thread, wrap it around your finger, take your other finger, hook the thread to make it so there's a bigger loop, and then pull kind of push the tail through, and then pull tight on the tail. And then before you let it get tight, make sure it's near the end of your thread. And then you pull it tight. And I will do that 3 times to make it a nice big knot. It's not always easy to get your knot to land directly on top of the other one, but you just kind of keep knotting it till you get a knot in the end where it's not going to just pull over that little hump. I did that 3 times. And then we'll pull it out of the pin cushion. And then we're back to starting. So being this is going to be a little bit different, we'll still do the knot we did in the beginning, but we're not going to hook into the other side when we do the knot. We're just going to hook into this fabric side here, and we're going to pull it till we find the end of our string, or just grab the end of your string. Take your needle, kind of try to get it between the 2 pieces of thread. So needle, thread, you can see it's on there. I can't pull it off the end. And then we're going to pull tight. And when you're doing this, if you're sitting next to somebody and someone's sitting like on my right side, I'm going to put the needle towards them with the loop side towards them so I don't poke them. It's kind of just the courtesy thing of I'm not going to poke you if you're sitting next to me. And especially if you have a long thread, it's pretty easy to do because your hand gets way out there. But I hooked that, and I just hooked into that side. So we have it tight around there. So we're going to poke down into the thread on the first side where we made our knot, and we're going to go all the way across. I'm staying underneath the little strings right now, and poke back up on the other side. And then we're not going to pull it super tight. So we're going to make sure, I made it a little long for what I'm doing, but we're going to make sure the thread doesn't have loops when we're pulling it tight, otherwise you're going to have loops to have to deal with. So if you have problems with loops, you just up by the needle, pull the needle slightly. If you yank it too hard, it'll break the thread. And you just pull it so we're just going to be loose. Because I'm not pulling it tight. See how it didn't pull the fabric together at all. But it's there. You can't see the thread. And we're going to just repeat that several times. So we're going to poke down. And then we're going to come up on the other side. So we're poking down the side we made the knot. And we're going to poke back up on the same way we did the last one. And we're not going to pull tight. And this one will be on the outside of the strings. See how we have one right here, and it's on the other side of the strings, and the other one's on the back side where the strings were on the jeans. And we're just going to repeat this several times until we make it across our hole. And doing this makes it so I don't have to have a piece of fabric laid behind it. And we're going to do a couple other steps to it, so stick with me here. And we have it across. And we're not going to leave it loose like this, because if you leave your strings loose, they're still going to catch on stuff. The whole point of fixing the hole is it's not going to catch on anything you get near. Because if even just like your car keys or something like that will hook on the thread if it stays loose, and it will tend to rip out, and we don't want that. So we made it all the way across our hole. Now we're going to do something a little bit different. We made it across this way. We're going to rotate so we're 90 degrees from this, because we were sewing this direction before. We're going to sew this direction now. So I'm going to rotate my jeans so they're in a nice position to work with. See now, here was the thread was this direction. Now we're going to just kind of continue around the hole, and we're going to go straight. But the thing we're going to do different is we're going to weave the thread. So we made our loops here. We're going to poke down, poke up, poke down, poke up, and go over and under the threads you see here. And what we're doing is it'll hold it tighter. And then once we get to our fabric, we'll poke through like normal sewing. And we're not going to yank it super tight. We don't want the fabric to bunch or do anything like that, because we're just weaving it. So then we need to keep it so it pulls straight. So I'm pulling it so I have a little tension on there. And then I have it here. So you can see I have no extra loops. And then it just, you can't even hardly tell I did that stitch. But then we'll do it again the other direction. And we'll just continue back and forth. So we'll poke back down into the fabric on the side you came out with your needle. And then we're going to poke back up over the first thread. Maybe. Down, and then up and down. It doesn't have to be super perfect, because you're going to go back and forth several times. But we're just going to continue doing that until you're essentially re-putting the fabric back together. And then I have that little loop right there, so we're just going to kind of pull our two pieces of thread so it kind of evens out. And then we just repeat. We poke back down on the side our thread came out of. I have to kind of hook into the seam because I can't hook or push down into the actual, like where it's sewn in the side of the jeans. And then we just pull, and it's tight. And then just keep repeating, and when we're done, it'll look pretty cool, because it will actually, we're reweaving in thread to make more fabric on this. I don't recommend it for huge holes, because it doesn't hold real well on a really big hole. You'd have to lay a piece of fabric in behind it. So you'd be doing essentially similar to it, but you'd stitch around the outside of the fabric. Do you have any questions you can think of? And viewers, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or send a message if you have any problems with your projects. And we will do our best to make sure we answer them for you. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Shannon from the Dream Big Farm. And we are just fixing clothing today, because we already did chores this morning, and it is rainy and icky, so we did look for an inside project today, and we just kind of stitching away. And once I'm done with this pair of clothes, or this pair of jeans, then I'm done with sewing for today. Just continue, and you want to go a little bit farther past the hole than where you originally had your hole, because it'll help hold it together. And this one spot I didn't go quite far enough when I stitched the first part of the hole. So you want to make sure everything stays kind of flat so you don't get the bumps, so it'll be less obvious when you're wearing it. And then this one, since I just didn't go far enough, I'm just going to stitch like normal. Poke one side of the fabric, come over, poke the other side of the fabric. But you can change your style of sewing quite a bit as you're sewing. There's no real rules to sewing, so you can't technically do it wrong. Only thing you really do is it'll look nicer if you do it certain ways than other. The most important thing is how you know you became good at sewing. Is your hole, what you fixed, held? So there's no real rhyme or reason to it. You just have the thread. Once you actually make it to the threading and tying the knot part, the way you stitch you can do however, because some people will stitch designs into it. I'm not going to do that today, but so I stitched the lower part of the hole I had, and I'm going to come back up here because I have a couple spots that didn't get wove in very well, so I would just poke back down, and then as I go I'm just going to weave up and down because I'm kind of weaving the fabric as I go. You only do the long stitching in the first part of this hole when you're going, and you see how that stitch just pulled out. I'm back in the middle with the thread. So I'll just poke back down and make sure I poke out a little bit farther away from the edge, and then it'll hold. And then I can go any direction I want. You just got to keep in mind if you end up yanking it kind of hard, it will pull it in a funny way and you'll feel it when you're walking, especially in jeans. But the goal is to get it so it doesn't have any spots to... Well, basically what you're doing is you're reinforcing the fabric. That would probably be the simplest way to put it. I will get better at doing videos. I'm still pretty new at this, so it takes time to figure out how to explain everything while I'm doing it. So a lot of times I can do this stuff and I just automatically, like the one a couple of other times, I just tie the knot without even remembering to explain it to you guys. But thanks for watching, and I hope you learn all kinds of new things and willing to try new projects. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm more than willing to answer questions the best I can. And if I don't know the answer, I will do my best to give you a good answer to make it work for you. And see how I have a nice tight stitching. You'll still have a little fraying around the hole. There's no real good way to get rid of that without doing the fabric behind. So if I did the fabric behind, it would be most likely you'd stitch around the piece of fabric you would have. So I wouldn't be going directly over the hole. You'd just be stitching around the edges of the hole. So if you do it that way, then you don't have the little fraying. But for these jeans, I'm sure he'll find other ways to put holes in them. So we'll call it good. So I'm going to stitch once on the same side of my thread came out. That's going to be the first part of my knot because I'm done with my hole. And then I'm going to do it again, stay right next to where I am. And then this time, I'm going to pull the tail of the needle through, so that when I say tail of the needle, it's the side with the eye, through the hole, or the loop that I've made with the thread, and it'll pull tight. And then we'll do that again. So we'll poke down in the same spot where their thread was. We're going to poke back up real close to it. And then we're just going to pull our needle through, and then find the loop of thread that was made from pulling the needle through, poke the back side of the needle through, so the side with the eye, through the hole, so it kind of crosses over your needle. So here's my loop, the needle went through the center, and then we're going to pull it tight, and then I'll do it just one more. I only really need to do it 2 times, but I'll do it one more time just so you can get it. Poke through the thread where your last stitch was, poke up pretty close to it, and then pull your needle so you have a little bit of a loop. And then I'll grab my other hand and make it pretty obvious. There's a loop right here, you can see. And then I'm going to take my needle, pull it through, so you're kind of wrapping the thread essentially. Poke the tail of the needle, so the side with the eye, through, pull, and then pull tight. And that is stitching. And then I will basically cut the tail. And then it's done. And then we'll show you what it looks like. So we had that big hole. I could stick my hand or like a couple fingers through it, and it was an L shape with a little extra spot on top. So we got the L part here with our normal stitching. And then we got the top part where it was starting to get the fraying with the threads from the jeans. that was small enough that we could weave the thread. So you go up and down poking, and then that's how you get it. And that is how you sew. So you want to see it? So we have the part that we did normal stitching with like a loop stitch around, and then we did our weaving stitching. So you poked, and then you went all the way across, poked, went all the way across, poked, went all the way across, until you did that multiple times. Then you switch directions, and you take your needle, and you're literally weaving up and down through the threads. And once you do that, and you have a couple spots that you think you need a little more, every stitch after that is a weaving stitch. And then we get to where we want to be done, and we tied our knot. So that is how you do the stitching. Hopefully this helps you save your garments, and that way you can, especially if you have like your favorite clothes and you need a little extra care for them when they get the holes in them, or your thread of the seam came loose or came out, you can just take a needle and thread and stitch it up, and then you're going to be good to go. And one other thing I'm going to quick point out is the best way to hold all your threads and stuff like that, because once you start getting threads, you're going to have a couple different colors, like a couple spools of thread, you have a couple needles, maybe some pins, and then it's like, what do I do with all this stuff? Well, the end of it is that you need some place to hold it. And pins and needles, a lot of the cases they send you with like the little sewing kits, they kind of work, but they don't do a real great job at holding things. So what I did, this is a mayonnaise jar, just a plastic one. Plastic's the best, so if you actually drop it, you don't break it. And I rinsed out the mayonnaise jar, so here's the lid, here's the bottom part. And what I did is I have some stuffing, or you can use cotton balls, because most people have those. And I just took any color fabric, I had pink fabric at the time, and I made it so I would have enough fabric to make a ball over top of the lid. And then I used a hot glue gun, and I stuffed all the, so I started doing I did like 3/4 of it in hot glue gun, and then I stuffed it full, and then I glued the last little bit, so it makes this nice little pin cushion on top of the lid. And then you can store your pins and needles. Just make sure your cushion's thick enough that your pins and needles have a little room to stick into it. And then the bottom part of the jar is just a mayonnaise jar, so it's plastic, and it's basically holds my stuff. So I have my leather thimble. This is what I told you I'd show you. So it's basically a piece of leather, and it just has a little elastic on the back. You can buy these at most any craft store. And so if you're worried about when you're doing the understitching, you don't poke yourself in the finger, that's what this is good for. And then I have some extra white thread, some safety pins, and the pliers. Sounds crazy, why do I have a pliers in my sewing kit? Well, if you're sewing like a jacket or something that's hard to pull the needle through, you wrap the jaws of your pliers in some kind of tape. I find electrical tape works the best because it's kind of stretchy. And then basically you just, so when the needle's coming through and you just can't get it past the eye because it's bigger, you just clip or like pinch on the needle and make sure you pull straight. If you pull up or down, you either bend your needle or you'll end up breaking it, which at that point you kind of have to cut it and start over. And then I have some other things. I have some extra pins, some extra needles, some elastic. I love the seam ripper. It's like a sewer's best friend. So when you mess up something, you just pull it out. It has this little hook part that you poke in the seams, and it just is sharp and it'll rip them out. They come in all different styles. This is just a really nice small one. And then I also have like pieces for my sewing machine, because I keep this with me all the time when I'm sewing. And then I have my tape measure for sewing. We can show you how to use that in other videos. But for today, that is how my basic sewing kit. And I might do a video later on to show you exactly how to make it, because it's a fun project to do with kids. And especially ones that are getting old enough where the hands-on stuff, where you're not worried about them actually eating the needles and stuff like that. So I'd make sure they're at least 6 or 7. 7's probably better. But it's a fun kit, and this one's actually super old. My grandma helped me make it probably like 20 years ago. So it's a blast. Because I remember it was fun. I've had it ever since then. And being it's plastic, it's very tough, and it lasts a super long time. Basically, unless you fully crush the jar by like someone jumping on top of it, it pretty much lasts a long time. But I love it. I had a great time making this. I hopefully you learned a lot about the video, or sewing in the video. And if you think of any other things you want me to do videos on for you, just put it in the comments. I will do my best to get to them. And I hope you had a great time watching it. I had a good time sewing, and good luck on your sewing projects. This is Shannon from the Dream Big Farm. And come see us again. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, subscribe. Have a nice day.